Shadows of arrogance. The debate hall erupted with laughter as Theo Morgan delivered his final, cutting rebuttal. Not because his argument was particularly witty, though it was, but because he had once again mimicked Elise Winter's stutter while quoting her opening statement, "Necesso," as my opponent suggests, he had said with exaggerated pauses. His handsome face twisted in mock concentration. We should all just accept that corporate interests somehow align with environmental protection. Professor Bennett frowned, but said nothing. The university's star debater had just secured another victory for the team, and disciplining him now would only create tension before nationals. Elise sat frozen, her notes trembling slightly in her hands, eyes fixed on her carefully prepared arguments, words that flowed perfectly in her mind but betrayed her. When spoken aloud, Theo basked in the attention as teammates clapped his back. At 22, he had it all: presidential scholarship, captain of the championship debate team, an early acceptance to Harvard Law. His dark hair fell casually across his forehead as he flashed his signature smile at Jessica, his girlfriend and the team's research lead. Morgan, that was unnecessary, Professor Bennett muttered as students filed out. Just adding some dramatic flair? Professor Theo replied with a shrug. Besides, if she can't handle a little pressure, she shouldn't be on the varsity team. Across the room, Elise quietly packed her bag. 20, she was younger than most seniors, having skipped a grade in high school. Intelligence had always outpaced her social confidence. Dark copper hair fell in waves around her face as she tried to make herself invisibly a skill she'd perfected over years of being the target of mockery. "Hey, Winters," Theo called out as she reached the door. "Seriously, though, your research was solid. If you ever figure out how to deliver it without sounding like a broken record, you might actually win something."
Oh.
His friend snickered. Jessica rolled her eyes, but smiled anyway, sliding her arm through his. Thank you for the feedback," Elise managed, her voice barely audible before she slipped into the hallway. Outside, autumn winds scattered golden leaves across the campus of Westlake University. Elise walked briskly toward the library, her sanctuary since freshman year. Inside, between towering shelves of linguistics texts, she could breathe again. "He's just threatened by you," said a voice. Olivia Patel, Elise's roommate and only real friend, appeared with an armful of medical textbooks.
Hi.
Her dark eyes narrowed. "Theo knows you write better arguments than anyone on the team." Doesn't matter if I can't deliver them," Elise said, the familiar frustration burning behind her eyes. "It's just a neurological glitch," Olivia insisted, her pre-med perspective always clinical. "And you're improving with the therapy." Later that evening, in their tiny apartment off campus, Elise practiced speech exercises before her linguistics presentation tomorrow. Olivia had already left for her hospital volunteer shift, leaving Elise alone with her thoughts and Dr. Lancaster's speech therapy recordings. Meanwhile, across town, Theo held court at the Summit, the bar where varsity athletes and campus elites gathered. He regaled his friends with a play-by-play of the debate, his impression of Elise growing more exaggerated with each retelling. "You should ease up on her," said Nathan, the only person who ever challenged Theo. "She's actually brilliant." You read her paper on cognitive linguistics?" "Please," Theo scoffed. "Brilliance means nothing if you can't communicate." "That's like being a mute musician." Jessica squeezed his arm. "Your Harvard interview is tomorrow. Don't stay out too late." Theo barely heard her. Tomorrow would be perfect, like everything in his life. He'd already drafted his victory text to his father, a federal judge who expected nothing less than excellence. What Theo couldn't know was that tomorrow held something entirely different, that somewhere between his perfect present and carefully plotted future, destiny was preparing to teach him the hardest lesson of all through the very person he deemed unworthy of his respect. The speech 3 years later, newly constructed Westlake Center for Neurological Rehabilitation, stood as a testament to medical innovation and human resilience. Its grand opening drew neurologists, speech pathologists, and rehabilitation specialists from across the country. Cameras lined the back wall of the auditorium, broadcasting the ceremony for medical education programs nationwide. In the front row, Elise Winters sat beside Dr. Lancaster, now the center's executive director. At 26, Elise had completed her doctorate in neurolinguistics. Her research on post-traumatic speech recovery earning national recognition. Her copper hair was elegantly swept up, professional but with a creative touch that reflected her. Evolving confidence? Nervous? Dr. Lancaster whispered as they waited for the keynote address to begin. For him, a little, Elise admitted, but he's ready. The audience quieted as Dr. Reynolds approached the podium. Our keynote speaker today embodies the journey our patients undertake. 3 years ago, a traumatic brain injury left him with severe expressive aphasia and dysarthria. Today, he leads our patient advocacy program and has authored a memoir on neurological recovery that has helped countless families navigate similar challenges. Please welcome Theodore Morgan. Applause filled the auditorium as Theo walked to the podium. At 25, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that had replaced his former arrogance. His physical recovery was nearly complete, though attentive. Observers might notice his slight carefulness on the stairs. His speech, while measurably improved, retained distinctive patterns that marked his neurological history, occasional hesitations, rhythmic differences, and a thoughtfulness in word selection that came from having to rebuild his relationship with language. Good afternoon, he began, his voice steady but different from the rapid-fire delivery that had once dominated debate halls. 3 years ago, I fell 70 feet while rock climbing without safety equipment, a decision that reflected how I lived my entire life, recklessly confident, believing myself invincible. He paused, taking a measured breath, a technique Elise had taught him for regulating speech patterns. Before my injury, I was defined by academic achievements and debate championships. I evaluated others solely on their ability to match my narrow definition of excellence. I specifically remember mocking a classmate with a developmental stutter, seeing her communication difference as a flaw rather than recognizing the extraordinary mind behind it. In the audience, Olivia Patel, now a resident neurologist at Westlake Hospital, glanced at Elise with a raised eyebrow. Elise kept her expression neutral, though a slight flush colored her cheeks. Theo continued, his speech flowing with practiced rhythm. When I woke in the hospital, unable to form coherent sentences, I experienced firsthand the gulf between intellectual understanding and expressive ability. Words, once my greatest weapon, became obstacles to navigate. Simple conversations exhausted me. Friends disappeared. Academic opportunities vanished. My identity collapsed. He looked up from his notes, scanning the audience. But something unexpected emerged from that loss. Through the rehabilitation process, I discovered what truly matters: the courage to persist, the humility to accept help, and the vision to see beyond surface limitations in myself and others. Theo's gaze found Elise in the front row, their eyes meeting briefly. My recovery journey brought me face to face with the very person I had once ridiculed. By some cosmic irony, or perhaps divine intervention, she became my speech therapist, choosing compassion over justified resentment. Through her expertise and extraordinary kindness, I not only regained communication abilities, but also gained profound insights about human dignity and authentic connection. The audience was completely silent now, captivated by the personal narrative. Underlying the medical journey, this rehabilitation center represents more than medical advancement, embodies the belief that every voice matters, regardless of how it sounds. That communication transcends perfect fluency or conventional expression. That the struggle to be heard and understood is fundamentally human and worthy of our deepest respect. Theo set aside his notes for the conclusion, speaking directly to the audience. Today, I no longer measure success by academic accolades or professional achievements, but by the capacity to see others clearly and connect authentically. My injury took my voice, but in finding it again imperfect but genuine, I discovered what it truly means to speak with purpose. He paused, his expression softening. This center will help countless patients rebuild their communication abilities. But I hope it also teaches what my journey taught me, that sometimes our greatest growth comes through our deepest vulnerabilities, and that true healing begins when we are finally brave enough to listen to voices different from our own. Applause was immediate and resounding. As Theo stepped away from the podium, Dr. Reynolds announced a brief reception in the adjacent atrium, amidst congratulations from colleagues and former professors. Theo made his way to where Elise stood near the windows overlooking the university campus. "You didn't mention we're engaged," she said with a small smile. "I wanted to respect your privacy," he replied. "This is your professional community." "I'm proud of our story," Elise said quietly. "Every part of it, even the difficult beginning." They stood together, observing the gathering. Nathan approached with his wife, followed by Olivia, who had gradually warmed to Theo over the years as she witnessed his transformation. "Quite a journey from the debate hall," Nathan remarked. "The longest distance I ever traveled," Theo agreed, was from arrogance to understanding. Later that evening, as they walked through the autumn-painted campus where their story had begun, Elise asked the question that occasionally still surfaced between them. "Do you ever regret the accident? Wonder what life would have been without?" Theo considered this carefully, as he did all important questions now. "I regret the pain I caused before it. The people I hurt with my blindness." He took her hand, the engagement ring catching the lamplight. "But I can't regret what led me to truly see you and through you, to finally see myself." Above them, maple leaves drifted down in the gentle evening breeze. It's golden and red against the darkening sky like the pages of their story, still being written, falling perfectly into place. Unexpected Kindness, the Neurolinguistic Rehabilitation Center, occupied the east wing of Westlake University Hospital, its modern glass facade contrasting with the older brick buildings of the medical campus. Theo sat in the passenger seat of his mother's car, staring at the entrance, his heart hammering against his ribs. "We don't have to do this here," his mother said gently. "There are other programs." But Theo shook his head. After seeing Elise's photo in the brochure he'd researched the center obsessively, it was among the top rehabilitation programs in the country, pioneering new techniques in post-traumatic speech recovery. If anyone could help him rebuild his shattered voice, it would be them. Evan, if it meant facing the consequences of his past cruelty. "I need to try," he managed, each word a small victory. The intake process was exhausting. Evaluations, assessments, baseline measurements of his linguistic capabilities. Theo's mind remained sharp, trapped behind the broken machinery of expression. He understood everything but could articulate almost nothing without painful effort. On his third day, he entered therapy room 4 for his first specialized session. The door opened, and there she was, Elise Winters, clipboard in hand, her copper hair now cut in a professional bob. She froze when she recognized him, emotions flickering across her face, too quickly to interpret. Theo Morgan," she said, and Theo noticed immediately that her stutter had improved dramatically, appearing only on his name, a reaction to the shock of seeing him, perhaps. "Hello. Elise," he replied, the irony of their reversed positions hanging in the air between them. For several seconds, neither spoke. Theo braced himself for rejection, for her to assign him to another therapist, a righteous anger any of which would have been deserved. Instead, Elise closed the door behind him and gestured to a chair. "I've reviewed your file," she said, her voice steady and professional. "Let's start with an informal conversation, so I can assess your current patterns." That first session was excruciating. Theo struggled through basic exchanges, sweat beading on his forehead with the effort. Elise remained clinically detached, noting his specific difficulties, word-finding problems, articulatory imprecision, prosodic disturbances that flattened his once expressive voice. As their hour ended, Theo finally forced out the question that had consumed him since recognizing her in the brochure. "Why? Would you help me?" Elise placed her clipboard down, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "Because I understand what it's like to be trapped inside your own mind." "Because nobody deserves that, not even you, Theo." The sessions that followed established a careful routine. 3 times weekly, Elise guided Theo through increasingly complex exercises. She proved to be a gifted therapist, intuitive, patient, and remarkably knowledgeable about the latest research in neurological speech recovery. "The brain is remarkably plastic," she explained during their 4th session. "With consistent practice, you can establish new neural pathways to compensate for the damaged areas." Gradually, painfully, slowly, Theo began to improve. Words came more readily, though his speech retained a halting quality. Elise celebrated each small victory without condescension, tracking his progress with meticulous charts that showed the upward trend of his recovery. One rainy afternoon, 6 weeks into his therapy, Theo arrived to find Olivia Patel, Elise's former roommate, observing their session. She regarded him coldly, clearly remembering his past behavior. "Elise, can I speak with you outside?" she asked after watching him struggle through a particularly difficult articulation exercise. Through the door's window, Theo watched their intense conversation. Olivia gesticulated emphatically while Elise listened calmly, occasionally shaking her head. When they returned, Olivia's expression remained frosty, but she said nothing further. Later, as Theo packed his materials, Elise sighed. "Olivia thinks I should have refused to work with you. She's probably right," Theo admitted. "Perhaps, but I made my choice." Elise hesitated, then added softly, "I started stuttering after my mother died when I was 9. Elise was like my words died with her. But my therapist saved me, showed me that my voice still mattered. Everyone deserves that chance, Theo." Her quiet dignity pierced him more deeply than any recrimination could have. That night, alone in his converted bedroom, Theo wept for the first time since his accident, not for himself, but for the pain he'd caused someone who now showed him nothing but compassion. The following week, Theo arrived for therapy with a carefully prepared sentence. Practiced for hours until he could deliver it with minimal disruption. "I am deeply sorry for how I treated you, Elise. There's no excuse. But I'm grateful beyond words for your help now." Elise's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. "Thank you. Now let's get back to work. You have a long way to go." And in that moment, something fundamental shifted between them, not forgiveness. Exactly, but the first tentative bridge across a chasm Theo had once thought impassable. Learning to see summer faded into autumn, marking 1 year since Theo's accident. The brilliant foliage outside the rehabilitation center's windows reminded him of how completely his life had transformed. His physical injuries had largely healed, leaving only occasional pain and a slight limp when tired. His speech, while significantly improved, remained labored and sometimes halting, a permanent reminder of his fall from grace. Harvard was now a closed chapter. Instead, Theo had enrolled in 2 online courses at Westlake, his re-entry into academia carefully managed with accommodations he would have once derided as weakness. Today's therapy session with Elise focused on narrative speech-telling, coherent stories under pressure, a skill he would need to resume any form of normal academic life. They had progressed from clinical detachment to a cautious professional friendship, bonded by the intensity of rehabilitation work. "Describe your first debate tournament," Elise instructed, setting a timer. "Focus on emotional content along with facts." Theo began haltingly, finding his rhythm as he spoke about the nervous excitement of his freshman competition.
Halfway through,
He realized something startling. He was revealing vulnerabilities he would never have admitted in his previous life. The old Theo had projected nothing but confidence and superiority. "I was terrified of a failing," he confessed. "My father expected perfection." When the timer beeped, Elise nodded approvingly. "Your fluency increases when you speak authentically rather than performing. That's common with acquired speech. Disorder's emotional honesty often bypasses some linguistic barriers." "Is that true for developmental stuttering too?" Theo asked. Elise considered this. "Sometimes. My stutter was always worse when I tried to sound like someone else. Best when I wasn't trying to prove my worth." These glimpses into Elise's inner world fascinated Theo. Each revealed a depth and resilience he had been too arrogant to see before. As autumn deepened, their sessions occasionally extended beyond their allotted time, conversations spilling into topics beyond therapeutic exercises. He learned that Elise had received a prestigious research grant to study neuroplasticity in speech. Recovery's case was actually contributing to her graduate thesis. She had overcome her stutter through years of determined work, though it still emerged when she was extremely stressed or emotional. "Language shaped my entire worldview," she explained one afternoon. "When words are unreliable, you develop different, Strength, observation, empathy, listening. You notice everything when speaking is difficult. Theo began to see the world through her perspective, the courage it took to join the debate team despite her stutter, the intelligence that had allowed her to excel academically while battling communication barriers. He recognized now what he'd been blind to before. Her brilliance had never been diminished by her speech difficulty. He had simply been too superficial to look beyond it. In November, Dr. Lancaster, the program director, evaluated Theo's progress. "Remarkable improvement," she noted. "You're ready to transition to maintenance therapy bi-weekly sessions rather than tri-weekly." The news should have been celebratory, but Theo felt an unexpected hollowness. Fewer sessions meant less time with Elise, whose presence had become the steadying center of his new life. That weekend, Nathan visited Theo at home, one of the few friends who had remained constant through his recovery. They sat in the backyard, watching leaves spiral from the maple trees. "The team won regionals," Nathan mentioned. "I couldn't do it now anyway," Theo said, surprising himself with the lack of bitterness in his voice. "You could, actually," Nathan countered. "Different category, maybe. There's a whole division for neurodivergent speakers, people with authentic stories about overcoming communication barriers." The idea lingered with Theo long after Nathan left. During his next session, he mentioned it hesitantly to Elise. "Would that interest you?" she asked, studying him carefully. "Competing again?" "Not to win," Theo said slowly, "but to speak about what I've learned, about humility, about seeing people clearly." Something softened in Elise's expression. "That sounds like healing, Theo."
After
Therapy, impulsively, he asked if she would join him for coffee. Her momentary hesitation was followed by a cautious yes. At the campus cafe, once his domain of social superiority, they sat as equals, her conversation extending beyond the clinical boundaries of the rehabilitation center. Theo noticed how her hands gestured expressively when she spoke about neurolinguistics, how her eyes brightened when discussing research possibilities. He saw, perhaps for the first time, not just Elise the therapist or Elise the former stutterer, but Elise the complete person, complex, brilliant, and deeply compassionate despite all reasons not to be. "Why did you really agree to be my therapist?" he asked finally. "The truth." Elise considered her answer carefully. "Initially, to prove something to myself. That I was stronger than my memories of how you made me feel." She paused, turning her coffee cup slowly. "But then I saw how genuinely you were struggling, how the accident had stripped away your defenses. And I recognized that you were more than your worst behavior, just as I had always been more than my stutter." Her words resonated with a profound truth Theo was only beginning to comprehend. They left the cafe as the early winter darkness descended, walking slowly through campus paths illuminated by lamplights. "I never saw people clearly before," Theo admitted. "Only reflections of my own ambitions. And now?" Elise asked quietly. "Now, I'm learning to actually see," he replied. And as he looked at her Kapoor's hair, catching the lamplight, eyes holding a wisdom born of struggle, Theo realized he was seeing her truly for the first time. And in that seeing lay the seeds of something unexpected and transformative. The fall from grace, the morning of Theo Morgan's Harvard Law interview, dawned crisp and bright, matching his confidence as he navigated the winding mountain roads in his silver Audi. The interview had gone flawlessly, the alumni interviewer practically assuring him of acceptance, and now Theo was heading to his favorite rock climbing spot to celebrate. Echo Canyon was deserted on weekday afternoons, which suited Theo perfectly. He preferred climbing alone, testing his limits without an audience. The solitude of the ascent cleared his mind in ways debate never could. His hands found familiar holds as he scaled the granite face without a rope-free soloing. As he'd done countless times before, 70 feet up, Theo reached for a jutting handhold he'd used a dozen times. But autumn rains had weakened the rock. His fingers closed around the stone just as it crumbled. For one suspended moment, Theo hung in midair, his mind refusing to process what was happening. Then gravity claimed him. He remembered flashes, the sickening sensation of falling. The first impact against an outcropping, tumbling, more impacts. Then darkness when consciousness returned 3 days later. The world had fundamentally changed. Theo's parents hovered beside his hospital bed, their faces etched with worry lines he'd never noticed before. His father, the stern federal judge who rarely showed emotion, clutched his hand with trembling fingers. "Theodore," his mother whispered, "can you hear us?" Theo tried to respond, but his mouth formed shapeless sounds. Panic flooded his system as he realized something was terribly wrong. When he finally managed words, they emerged distorted and halting. What's happening? The irony wasn't lost on him, his speech now fractured in a cruel echo of Elise Winter's single quotes. Dr. Reynolds, a neurologist with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, explained the damage. "You've suffered a traumatic brain injury, affecting your left temporal lobe and Broca's area regions critical for speech production. There's also damage to your cerebellum, which controls coordination." The diagnosis continued with clinical terms that seemed disconnected from Theo's reality: aphasia, dysarthria, cognitive linguistic deficits. But the translation was devastatingly simple. The voice that had carried him to debate championships, it had charmed professors and peers alike, was now a broken instrument he could barely control. The weeks that followed blurred together. Theo underwent multiple surgeries to address the physical injuries: a shattered femur, broken ribs, punctured lung. But it was the invisible damage that terrified him most. Words that once flowed effortlessly now required exhausting concentration. Sometimes the right words vanished entirely, leaving gaping holes in his thoughts. His recovery became a parade of specialists and therapies: physical therapy for his damaged body, occupational therapy for basic tasks he'd taken for granted, and most humiliatingly, speech therapy for the voice that had defined him. As weeks turned to months, Theo's social circle contracted with alarming speed. Jessica visited less frequently, her discomfort obvious when he struggled through conversations. Eventually, she stopped coming altogether, breaking up via text message. "I can't handle this. I'm sorry. I need to focus on law school." Harvard rescinded their early acceptance, offering instead to reconsider his application when his health stabilized. His father's disappointment, though never explicitly stated, hung between them during increasingly uncomfortable hospital visits. Only Nathan remained constant, visiting between classes, bringing assignments Theo could no longer complete. "Professor Bennett asks about you," Nathan mentioned one afternoon. "The team's not the same without you." Theo turned away, unable to bear the thought of the debate hall. They mock him now, as he had mocked Elise? The question haunted him through sleepless nights. By spring, Theo had recovered enough physically to be discharged from the hospital, but his cognitive and speech rehabilitation would continue indefinitely. His parents converted their home office into a bedroom so he wouldn't have to manage stairs. His once independent life now required constant supervision and assistance. One afternoon, as Theo struggled through speech exercises with mounting frustration, he hurled his therapy workbook across the room, pages scattered, landing near a stack of university mail his mother had been collecting. A brochure caught his eye: the Neuro-Linguistic Rehabilitation Center at Westlake University Hospital, advertising their intensive speech recovery program. There, in the glossy photo of the therapy team, stood a familiar face he never expected to see again. Copper hair pulled back, professional smile. Standing alongside senior speech pathologist Elise Winters. Identified as a graduate assistant in the neurolinguistics program, Theo stared at her image, remembering his cruel imitations, the laughter he'd incited at her expense. Shame washed over him, more painful than any physical injury he'd sustained. And yet, within that shame flickered something else, the first fragile spark of hope he'd felt since the fall.